Let's have a talk, let's have a chat, talking about a little this and that. Hello and welcome to This and That. As promised at the end of episode 7, Laodicea, in the series of Revelations Understanding the Letters, I am doing what I hope is a short. If it gets long, pardon me. We call this one the Dometian Problem. To listen to the 7 episodes on Revelations Understanding the Letters, or Revelations Another Look, go to talkingaboutthisandthat.wordpress.org, click on the podcast link, and find the series. You will find this, the Dometian Problem, at the end of episode 7 in the Revelations Understanding the Letters series. So, why was Christianity a problem for a religious place like the Roman Empire with its pantheism? I mean, you'd think they'd be tolerant, right? Jewish religiosity was one thing, but they were a nation that made Rome wish it had never given the Pax Romanus to them. Still, as long as the coffers could collect the Fiscus Judaicus from them, they tolerated them. That is until 70 AD. I mean, then it was all over. But still, they could sort of make ends meet as long as they paid their Fiscus Judaicus. You know, you are Jewish, you will pay a tax. By the way, this sounds so anti-Semitic. It's not. This is Rome. This is about history. We're not doing that today. God. No Jew should be paying their tax other than the tax of being an American citizen, like, income tax, property tax. If you don't like the taxes, talk to your government. Oh, wait. Aren't we on a war on terror? Dang it, we got to pay the IRS. It's the law. When you're at war, they have to levy the tax to support the war machine. Go look it up. Go Google it. So then, by the time of Domitian, there was a need for that tax. It was desperately needed. This whole new, quote-unquote, people of the way that got discovered, who were not Jews, who were not paying the tax, were also another problem because they were considered, quote-unquote, atheists, people who had no God. Well, that's not true. But to the Romans, that was true. See, the God of Israel, of the Jews, they didn't accept. That wasn't part of their pantheon. But the Jew had his tax. Pay your tax, keep your mouth shut. You don't want to be Roman? Fine. But you'll pay to subsist in our midst. That was the idea. These other people started out as a Jewish subsect. These held to the God of the Jews on the one hand and his son on the other. So as more and more Gentiles crammed themselves into this people of the way, quote unquote, this becomes a problem because they can't very well say, well, we're Jewish. And by the time the apostles are dying out, that's not going to work either, because it's getting kind of obvious that this is a Gentile church that believes in the God of Israel. With a twist. Israel's God had a son, a bouncing baby boy, some lady named Mary. Oh, they're staking their life on it. He's the Messiah. He's our Savior and our Master and our King. Oh, and he has rules and standards. So, here's the problem. Took a little digging on the internet, and I went to a few sites. I will quote them for you as I quote from them. The thing of the pagan Rome was that it was very serious about its religiosity. Rome has its history. It believes that it is founded from the gods themselves. One of the gods landed in the Etruscan area. He had a son who had boys. This happens, that happens, a she-wolf comes along, and that's how the babies get suckled. First off, wow, those are some tough little Romans. Humans subsisting on doggy milk? You know, puppy milk for puppies, kitty milk for kitties, baby milk for babies. Right? Am I right? Am I right? Is it she-wolves? I don't know. These guys were subsisting on wolf milk. They learned to be wolves. They were wild boys. You talk about your wild child. There were two of them. One killed the other, and bang! Rome was born. You realize that it was Romulus who killed Remus, because otherwise it would not be Rome, but Reem, maybe. Just saying. So here's the problem. The Etruscans were there. The Greeks were there. This fledgling little Roman Empire starts up, and it goes, oh, the gods of the Etruscans are our history, and they stuff the Etruscan stuff into theirs, and so they expand on their history, and they start to form their culture. And they look at the Greeks, and they go, ooh, this is interesting. So Zeus becomes Jupiter. Ares becomes Mars. You know, I mean, come on. Who becomes Venus? Oh, and who becomes Minerva? They have their triad. Yeah, come on. I mean, they just renamed Greek gods, but they had their little Roman clique too. They also had the family thing. These people were your basic. Well, we have this in the Spanish, paganos, countrymen. People, don't write me for my Spanish. I speak it, but I don't use the language much. So vocabulary, grammar, the campesinos, the countrymen, the country bumpkins were called paganos. That's where we get the idea of the pagan or the pagan, because they're country bumpkins. They're superstitious. Don't go under a ladder. Don't go near a black cat. You know? Don't traffic with witches. Don't. But these people were religious. This is the problem. You're religious. You're really religious. And you have this thing. You believe in the balance of the universe. This is Roman thinking. This is a lot of other religious thinking where you have pantheism. There's a balance, the good and the bad, like the yin and the yang. The good and the bad, the good versus the evil. And they have their, and this is all over the world. Okay? Other religions have their stories. Egypt did it. The Sumerians did it. The Babylonians did it. The Persians did it. The Middle East has it. The Syrians. It's just that it's been overarched by Islam. But if you look beneath Islam to the original culture, you'll find the Syrians, and there are all these other bands, and they're gods. In fact, go take a look at how Islam actually started. The Kaaba has a very interesting backstory. It wasn't always what we think it is. For those of you who are Muslims, tread lightly, do your research, make your own decision, and may heaven help you, because your culture won't. They'll kill you. Just saying. Be forewarned if you walk away. It will be bad for your life. But Pagan Rome had this. It's called the Pax Deorum, or, quote-unquote, peace of the gods, as long as the harmony and the balance of appeasement to the god took place. Oh, well, everything was wonderful. The crops grew. The wars were won. There was peace in the city-states. There was not too much bickering. Everybody could have his little domicile, practice his family religion, blah, blah, blah. Everybody went to the various festivals. Everybody did their thing. It was a very religious system. Snapshot. The ancient Roman religion had its religious system. A regular household would have a god of the vestibule or threshold, and it was usually Janus the Two-Headed. Pisces is our Janus. For those of you that are into the signs, 2 fish. That's not Christian. That's the 2 faces of Janus. Of course, he was always kind of fishy to begin with. Quote, Janus, who had no Greek equal, he was the 2-faced guardian of the doorways and public gates. Janus was valued for his wisdom and was the first god mentioned in a person's prayer. Because of his 2 faces, he could see both the past and the future, unquote. But the door to the Roman home had more than just Janus. Quote, there was Cardea, the goddess of the hinges. Forculus, goddess of the door leaves. You know, the door panel, leaf panel, the piece of wood or metal that you swing open and close. That's a leaf. Lementius, the god of the threshold, unquote. worldhistory.org/Roman_religion. There were gods and goddesses, for example, the hearth. You walked in the home, you had Janus. You had all these other things, and you paid your respects to them. And then you went into the center of your home, and there would be the hearth. We have heard the term home and hearth. This is a very real saying. This goes back to Europe. The fireplace is a focal point for a reason. Go to places like Colonial Williamsburg, if it's still around, and you find these houses with these very deep fireplaces. They have a spit for meat. They have a place to bring a spit so you can turn it. They have a hook to hang the kettle, and they were set up to have a live fire for cooking. That fire would also heat the kitchens. You did your bread. You had your ovens. A whole bunch of stuff. Every room had fires. In a Roman house, this was what kept your home warm. This fire never went out. And it had a goddess. Vesta was the goddess of the eternal flame, and women had to tend and keep that hearth at the center of the Roman home burning always. In fact, quote, if the fire was to burn on forever, then it was only when the family moved away to another home that the fire would be put out with wine in a small ritual, unquote, because, quote, it was at the hearth sacrifices were made to the gods and the spirits of the family's ancestors, unquote. worldhistory.org/Roman_religion. Quote, everyday prayers would be said to Vesta. During meals, some food might be set aside and passed into the fire as an offering to the goddess, unquote. worldhistory.org/Roman_religion. You start to see the religion of the home. But then there was the religion of the family. Quote, the spirits of the house were the lares and penates. The lares were the spirits of the family's ancestors. They were represented by little figurines which would be kept in a special cupboard. Among them, the lar familiaris, the family spirit, was the most important. On a everyday basis, short prayers and small offerings would be made to the lares. And on the more sacred days of the month, the calends, the ides, the nones, or on special days like a wedding, a birth, a birthday, more elaborate rituals were held in their honor. Meanwhile, the penates were the spirits of the larder where you store your food. Thanks were given to them for keeping the family fed. They, too, were represented by little figurines, and they, too, had their own little cupboard they resided in. They would tend to be taken out and placed on the table during meal times. When the family ever moved house, then its lares and penates invariably moved with them. Unquote, worldhistory.org/Roman_religion. It goes on. Next, we find a different ideology behind the word genius, as in, that was a genius idea. Man, you a genius. Quote, the third household spirit of note was the genius, who was usually represented in the form of a snake. This genius was, in a sense, the, quote, manhood, unquote, of the family, which empowered the husband to father children. Naturally, the place of its greatest influence within the house was in the marital bed. The genius of the house was particularly celebrated on the head of the family's birthday, unquote. Of course, that genius represented the male influence to sire offspring, would have its counterpart for the fertility of the wife, and there were the goddesses for the fetus, for the birth, for the breastfeeding, for the talking, for walking, for the naming. There were goddesses to protect every aspect of a child until it reached its adult point at a certain age, when daughters were declared and sons had their declaration as legitimate heirs and their reception of their first toga virilis. The children wore amulets. That's right. See, these were very, very, very religious people. Very spiritual folks, these Romans were. My goodness, they were so spiritual. The manes also were a part of this, which were the ancestors. A Roman son took the training of the cult of his family's gods, and when he took his wife, she left the gods of her father's house and entered into the gods of her husband's house. And she was only good for the air. Men could sleep around, but God helped the wife. That was her death. Only one could produce the legitimate male heir. And that's all she was good for. So, given our recent state of affairs, those of you with breasts that are listening, think about this. Would you want to have lived in Rome? Really? Oh, husbands, love your wives was the greatest plea, because wives respect your husbands. Oh, no, that was Patris Patri. Woman, you didn't respect your husband, you could die for it. Ooh, but they're so religious, these Romans. These pagans, these paganos. Oh, so spiritual. But then, now, the men, by the way, could sleep around. They could go to the Vestal Virgin, or they could go to the cult dogs. For those of you that are flying the rainbow flag, this means that you would have loved Rome. Maybe. There were limits, and you had to be of the right class to pull this off too, folks. The Romans, the men slept with one another. It was, if you were of an upper class, you could sleep with someone down below you. Yeah, right down to the slaves. They could be your friends with benefits. And the ladies, oh, come on. You know what a Vestal Virgin is, don't you? By the way, the virgins, the Vestal Virgins, the virgins of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, were supposed to be celibate. So, to be called a Vestal Virgin means, boys, don't touch me, or the rest of the virgins will just gang on me and kill me. You better leave me alone. I'm a Vestal Virgin. Oh my! The rest of the cult, they were not virgins. They were the cult prostitutes. Sex was used to elicit the mysteries of the gods. Sex by a man could be an offering to the gods through the temple prostitutes. Yes, and you paid for the pleasure of it. Brothels and houses and baths and places where you could go off and do it. Everything was kind of decent, kind of hidden, kind of suggestive, and during certain festivals, kind of, oh well, if you want to let it hang out, we don't care. It's party time. But that's not enough. Only one of the sons of a household could be the legitimate heir, and only that one could keep the family's religion strong. As long as the manes, the lares, etc., and the gods, and penates, let's not forget the spirits of the larder, were kept happy, you prospered. That's how they saw it. But this is just the household. This is just the familial religion. Oh, no, it gets better. The state had its gods. The kingdom had its founding from Romulus and Remus, who were sons of a god. This is taken from wikipedia.org/wiki/religion_in_ancient_Rome. Quote, according to legends, most of Rome's religious institutions could be traced to its founders, particularly Numa Pompilius, the Sabine, second king of Rome, who negotiated directly with the gods. This archaic religion was the foundation of Mos Maiorum, quote, the way of the ancestors, unquote, or simply, quote, tradition, unquote, viewed as central to Roman identity. Roman religion was practical and contractual, based on the principle of duat des, quote, I give that you might give, unquote. Religion depended on knowledge and the correct practice of prayer, rite, and sacrifice, not a faith or dogma, according to Latin literature, preserves learned speculation on the nature of the divine and its relation to human affairs. Even the most skeptical among Rome's intellectual elite, such as Cicero, who was an augur, saw religion as a source of social order, unquote. If the gods were appeased, the harvests, the peace, the stability of the kingdom was achieved. If an imbalance ensued, then there were issues, uprisings, droughts, earthquakes, defeats in battle, inability to expand were all seen by the Roman mind as the will of the gods. But if it was negative, then the augurs and the priests and the oracles began to be consulted for the guilty parties. Or, how do we fix this? What do we do? What do the gods want? Who do we sacrifice? The Jew was the subject of much upset after 70 AD. The Jew paid his tax and was left alone without any real power. However, like I said previously, the Christian, who was seen as an atheist because the Christian had to reject both Judaism, without rejecting Israel's God, the Father, the Savior, and the state, local, and familial gods, ancestral worship, the manes, in these places broke down. If a disease hit the populace, the Christian atheist was sought out to be eliminated, thereby appeasing the gods. See where this goes? Then we come to the big issue. The emperor himself. Quote, Domitian thought himself the reincarnation of Hercules. Unquote. worldhistory.org/Roman_religion. Now, a man who believes himself to be the reincarnation of Hercules? Where was this said before? Oh, wait, I know. Antiochus Epiphanes. He styled himself to be the reincarnation of Zeus. He had the Zeus installed and burned a pig on the altar in Jerusalem. This triggered the books of the Maccabees and the Hasmonean revolt, or the Hasidic revolt. That's right. We have the Hasids today. Nah. They're not the same Hasids from then, but... Oh, and by the way, Antiochus thought himself to be the reincarnation of Zeus because this young Syrian was raised Roman, but he took the reincarnation of a Greek god. Go figure. So then, to be the reincarnation of a god or a demigod, Hercules is a demigod. Let's get our gods right. Let's be good paganos and get our gods straight. Hercules is a demigod. His mother was a human. His father was a deity. Thank you very much. Now, to be the reincarnation of either a god or a demigod was a good deal for an emperor. Since Domitian saw himself as the reincarnation of a demigod, it's no small reason that those who refused to worship him under the cult of the emperor were often slaughtered in the arenas of the Colosseum by wild animals as criminals and enemies of the state. They would also have been abhorrent for upsetting the delicate balance of the pleasure of the gods of Rome. But it gets better. If you had holding, if you were a merchant or tradesman, and then became one of those born-again Christians, atheists, that was a problem for you. To not bow the knee and burn the incense and do the worship, the homage to the emperor was punishable both by death for you and confiscation of all your home and assets. Where do you think those went? Caesar's pocket. Jesus wasn't kidding when he said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. Because if you gave to God what was God's, your life, your soul, your commitment, your loyalty, then you automatically gave to Caesar what was Caesar's. Your home, your family, your assets, your businesses, your coinage. He wasn't kidding, was he? Wow. Your whole life was destroyed. Anywhere you tried to run in the empire, you were a marked person. Try to run to the Jews, you're a Christian, they don't want you. The letter to Smyrna, what was happening? The Judaizers were outing them to Domitian. It's only the Philadelphians that had that reversed, where the Judaizers were bowing to the Philadelphians' feet. That's a mystery. I would have loved to have found out how that was done. I mean, the same synagogue of Satan that was outing the Smyrnans was bowing to the Philadelphian church. That's a thing, that is. Until Constantine, to be a Christian was a death sentence. Sherwin White, a British academician and ancient historian, makes his observations about the persecution of Christians as recorded in wikipedia.org/wiki/persecution _of_Christians_in_the_Roman_Empire. Quote, Nero had an older resolution forbidding the institution of a new religion, but the application to Christians is seen as coming from a much older Republican principle that it was a capital offense to introduce a new superstition without the authorization of the Roman state, unquote. Now, there are a lot of opinions, but this one stands out because of the Pax Deorum. The concept of the Pax Deorum is a serious issue in Rome. It is said that this might explain Rome itself, but it might not explain the paganos of the countryside or even the individual city-states. So this is another line of thought that is surmised. Quote, from the same source, the 2nd century, which originated with German scholars and is best known theory to English readers, is that a coercion or curtailment took place. It holds that Christians were punished by Roman governors through the ordinary use of their power to keep order because Christians had introduced, quote, an alien cult which induced, quote, national apostasy, unquote, insert and the abandonment of the traditional Roman religion, unquote. The idea of the, quote, alien or atheist, unquote, cult, a, quote, national apostasy, unquote, is also going to upset the Pax Deorum or peace of the gods. So if you upset it anywhere within the Roman Empire, you upset it for the whole Roman Empire. That's the point. Gosh, these Christians are just making so much trouble. Kill them all. Let the emperor sort them out. That's how the Romans saw it. Kill them all. Let the emperor sort them out. Or Jupiter, maybe. I don't know. Somebody. So, the idea that Christians might have been brought up on charges up to and including treason for the refusal to perform the ceremonial veneration or worship in the cult of the emperor is a very valid one, and goes thusly. Quote from the same source above, out of wikipedia.org, a third school asserted that Christians were prosecuted for specific criminal offenses such as child murder, incest, magic, illegal assembly, and treason, a charge based on their refusal to worship the divinity of the Roman emperor, unquote. If a believer prayed for the sick and the sick person was, quote, healed by God, unquote, this was magic. Only the augurs and the oracles and the priest cults were allowed to do the magic, quote unquote. Illegal assembly would mean gatherings and the preaching of the gospel, lest we forget the great philosopher of Plato, Socrates, who drank the hemlock and was accused of leading the youth into apostasy and corruption. He was just getting the youth to use the organ between their ears and think for themselves. And he was a Greek, and they did that to him as a Greek. The Romans did it too. If Socrates had been a Roman, he would have still drank the hemlock or been crucified. But that would be a whole nother painting. Socrates on the cross. What? Oh, if you thought Jesus was the only victim of the cross, guess again. That was so common. Psh, give me a break. So, anything proselytizing the gospel was illegal because it upset Pax Deorum. But the biggest issue of all is the culture clash and the ideological clash. Jesus as king versus emperor as king. Jesus as God versus emperor as God. Notice the little g there. Little g. Very little g. So we had this statement, quote, Joseph Plessia says persecution was caused by an ideological conflict. A man by the name of Cairns talks about it. Caesar was seen as divine. Christians could only accept one divinity, and it wasn't Caesar. Cairns describes the ideological conflict as, quote, the exclusive sovereignty of Christ clashed with Caesar's claims to his own exclusive sovereignty, unquote. In this clash of idolatries, quote, the ordinary Christian lived under a constant threat of denunciation and the possibility of arraignment on capital charges, unquote. Joseph Bryant asserts, it was not always easy for Christians to hide their religion and pretend to Romanness either, since renunciation of the world was an aspect of their faith that demanded, quote, numerous departures from conventional norms and pursuits, unquote. The Christian had exacting moral standards that included avoiding contact with those that still lay in the bondage to, quote, the evil one. 2 Corinthians 6, 1 through 18. 1 John 2, 15 through 18. Revelations 18, 4. 2 Clement. Now this is second tier stuff. This is the church writings. So 2 Clement 6. I don't know if I want to do this, but Epistle of Barnabas, maybe. That's Apocrypha. Life as a Christian required daily courage, quote, with the radical choice of Christ or the world being forced upon the believer in countless ways, unquote. Quote, Christian attendance at civic festivals, athletic games, and theatrical performances were fraught with danger, since in addition to the, quote, sinful frenzy, unquote, and, quote, debauchery, unquote, aroused, each was held in honor of pagan deities. Various occupations and careers were regarded as inconsistent with Christian principles, most notably military service and public office, the manufacturing of idols, and of course, all pursuits which affirmed polytheistic culture, such as music, acting, school teaching. Hippolytus and the apostolic tradition are quoted here. Even the wearing of jewelry, the toga, that would be another one, and fine apparel was judged harshly by Christian moralists and ecclesiastical officials, as was the use of cosmetics and perfumes in Rome. Citizens were expected to demonstrate their loyalty to Rome by participating in the rites of the state religion, which had numerous feast days, processions, and offerings throughout the year. Christians simply could not, and so they were seen as belonging to an illicit religion that was antisocial and subversive, unquote. When we look at Paul's writings, we really do see the concept of a radical breach. But today, we don't have quite the debacle of the Roman era. A man by the name of MacDonald adds, quote, MacDonald explains that the privatizing of religion was another factor in persecution, as, quote, Christians moved their activities from the streets to more secluded domains of houses, shops, women's apartments, severing the normal ties between religion, tradition, and public institutions like cities and nations, unquote. MacDonald adds that Christians sometimes, quote, met at night in secret, and this also aroused suspicion among the pagan population accustomed to religion as a public event, Rumors abounded, unquote. The night meetings were also problems as certain debauching cults that threatened women's sanctity to their quote-unquote lords or husbands in the patris patri, the Roman household of the pagan Romans, they were an issue. Like I've said, women at that time who could got up to some serious troubles and shenanigans themselves, but they were usually at night. It would naturally be suspect that the Christians were despoiling the wives and begatting illegitimate children that could vie for power, as in the legitimate heirs of the family religion. By Domitian's day, and inheriting what he got and his attempt to stay in power, loyalties of Rome were vital. Plus, peace of the gods. Also, the practice of communion and the body and blood sacrifice of Jesus was a suspicious thing to the Romans. Cannibals! Yeah, we were labeled as cannibals. You're eating his body and drinking his blood. Ew! In that, Christians referred to one another as brothers and sisters, made incest suspect. I mean, brother, sister. That's not how Romans addressed each other. But that's how siblings addressed each other. Point. In Christianity, we have one Father. We're all joint heirs, brothers and sisters, and joint heirs to Jesus Christ to inherit the kingdom. That isn't so freaky nowadays since Christianity kind of took over Catholicism. Remember that? Yeah. But back then, oh, come on. That's just weird. Imagine a Roman wife who some man calls sister. She is dead. The man is hunted down and killed too. You say one word and two people die. All sorts of religious upheaval, and the Roman husband could lose his social standing because his wife was a Christian. As I had said earlier, the radical breach of the manes and the genius of the family, ancestral worship, would have been seen as massively disruptive. Quote, Edward Gibbon argued that the tendency of Christian converts to renounce their family and country and their frequent predictions of impending disasters instilled a feeling of apprehension in their pagan neighbors. He writes, by embracing the faith of the gospel, the Christians incurred the supposed guilt of an unnatural and unpardonable offense. They dissolved the sacred ties of custom and education, violated the religious institutions of their country, and presumptuously despised whatever their fathers had believed as true or had reverenced as sacred. Unquote. So we see why the churches were written to in this vision. Has this vision come to pass? I did say I would look at Constantine as possibly being a great savior of the church, and indeed he was, but still this is not the book or prophecy itself. For the prophecy as it is written, or as we see it written today, has yet to occur. I insert, as of 2024, I insert to this, I'm starting to wonder if it isn't actually starting. So church, you better start looking around and praying, because, I don't know, this stuff's weird, man. Okay, back to the post here. Back to this. Much is said in the articles online, and you can go read further for yourself in Wikipedia. Constantine did not conquer Domitian, or Diocletian, or any of the other emperors that followed. He was a ways down the line, about 300 years worth in time. We can easily see where turmoil of politics, not unlike the debacles and swirling controversies and speculations of right now in 2024 in the USA, could be read into the last book of the Bible. They did it in their day. We're starting to do it in ours. I mean, I just did it. Didn't I just do an insert? Said to the church, look around and pray? But the famous battle and the sign was the beginning of change. Worldhistory.org/Constantine has this to say, quote, with little support in the city, Maxentius left Rome to meet Constantine in one final crucial battle, the Battle of Milvian Bridge, 312 CE. On the day before the battle began, Constantine reportedly looked to the sky where he saw a cross of light. Under it was the inscription, In hoc signo vinces, or, quote, in this sign conquer, unquote. That night, in a dream, he received an explanation of the sign. Jesus Christ appeared to him, telling him to carry the sign of the cross into battle. The following day, old banners were replaced with new ones displaying the Christian symbol. Although outnumbered, Constantine easily defeated Maxentius, who fled to Rome. However, before reaching the city, he fell into the river and drowned. His body was discovered the next morning among the corpses of many others. Constantine's conversion to Christianity is seen by historians as a turning point in history, a fusion of church and state. Let me say that again. A fusion of church and state. Constantine immediately assumed complete control of the West. As the new Augustus in the West, he marched into Rome. One of his first acts was to issue the Edict of Milan, a toleration of all religions. It would later be co-signed by Licinius, unquote. One can easily see where this sounds like a Jesus has come moment. But it doesn't follow the path of Revelations itself. From Constantine's rule, the Christians became the rulers of a failing Rome. But a church nation will not solve the evils of the world, and was never meant to. It was to be a haven for the disabused, poor, elderly, widowed, orphan, homeless, etc. Equal grace was to be shown to all the rest of humanity, whether LGBTQIA++ or not. Or, I don't know, what does the church find more offensive these days? So those people too. The LGBTQ, they just simply flaunt their issues, okay? Others have their sins delineated. Yeah, Galatians 5:19 through 25 has this list. You can Google it. I do perhaps recommend a real book Bible, something you can backpack and read. As strong as you are in the Word is as strong as you will be able to stand in this day and age, Christian. The Christians of Rome were hounded and hated. They upset the gods and were held responsible for a ludicrous array of sorrows of a failing nation. We today may be on the cusp of the same thing. It is time for believers to step away from the doing and start with the seeking of the God of the book, or Lord of the book of the Lord, not to save the nation or nations. No. This is, by the way, the writer. I truly think we are finally headed for the last book of the Bible. See, the writer's even doing it. But to save us and keep us strong towards God and rich towards God by His Word and His Christ treasured in our hearts, we need to seek the Lord. What they did to conceal the truth, we will do. But God exposes. Then again, we could hope to be a Philadelphia church versus a Laodicean church. Oh, which way is that going to go? In the end, It's not so much Domitian or Diocletian or any other Roman Caesar who was the problem with the believers, but the culture itself. It demanded compromise in a society that was grossly pagan and demanded that every citizen partake. It was the law of the land. As I write this, there's a quiet war being waged in hearts everywhere. One way is anarchy. One way is a church-state world. One way is a corrupt but free world of tolerances. But the end way will be the King of Glory, and he will bring the justice the planet is dying for. In the end, it seems we are as troubled as the early believers, but there is still freedom to say, quote, "No, thank you, I don't want to partake," unquote. When that leaves, then which will we be? Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, or Laodicea? The choice is in your hearts. To the overcomer goes, and let the listener hear what the Spirit is saying. Well, that is a wrap for this series, and as I promised, so I have delivered. For This and That, I am Mary Easterling. Until next time.